Hello everyone. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today, we're going to dive into a story full of emotions and hidden family secrets. A mother forced out of her home. A little girl who reveals the truth no one dared to speak for years. And a family that seemed peaceful but was secretly falling apart. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next dramatic chapters. Today, we're heading into a story set in Buok Bao. A story so heavy, it leaves a tight knot in your chest. It's about a mother who was pushed out of the very house she once called home. About a little girl who accidentally spoke a truth the adults had buried for years. And about a family that looked calm on the outside, but was quietly falling apart from the inside. Huyen, a woman carrying scars no one could see, decided to take her daughter Maya to visit her paternal grandparents. She never imagined that a single, trembling sentence from her child would turn everything upside down. When Maya innocently said, "Grandpa, Grandma is mean. She kicked my mom out of the house," the courtyard froze. In that exact moment, a truth hidden for 5 long years. The real reason Huyen had been forced to leave her husband's home. The secret plan to keep Maya behind. Even the intention to take her to visit her father in prison. All came crashing into the open. The tension between Mr. Huan and Mrs. Yoa snapped tight, like a rope pulled to its limit, pushing the story toward a twist no one expected. And when Huyen finally took her daughter and left in tears, another secret was already waiting to be exposed. But to understand how everything reached that breaking point, we have to go back to that morning. That small house was unusually peaceful. A soft breeze whispered through the garden leaves, as if welcoming a new day. But inside Huyen, there was no peace at all. A storm of anxiety churned in her chest, the same fear that had kept her awake night after night. She stood by the window, fingers intertwined, trembling slightly. Her eyes were red, heavy with exhaustion. After a long silence, she spoke quietly. "Yeah, I think I'll take Maya to her grandparents' house today. Even though Tuk and I are no longer together, they're still her grandparents." Ye paused. He turned to look at her, studying her face as if trying to read every fear she hadn't said out loud. His voice dropped, thick with concern. "You're taking her there alone?" Huyen lowered her gaze, biting her lip. "I don't know how to handle this. My ex-mother-in-law never liked Maya. And now she suddenly wants me to bring her over to play. I'm scared. Scared something might happen." Her voice cracked. Without hesitation, Ye stepped closer and placed a hand on her shoulder. His tone was firm, but warm, steady in a way that made her chest loosen just a little. "If you're scared, I'll go with you. I won't let anyone hurt you or Maya. She can greet her grandparents, and then we'll leave. You don't have to face them alone." That hand on her shoulder felt like an anchor, the only thing she could still trust. Just then, light footsteps padded across the floor. Maya appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes, her hair a mess. She ran straight to her mother and wrapped her arms around Huyen's neck. Huyen hugged her tightly, forcing a smile to hide the ache in her chest. "Maya, do you remember your grandparents? Mommy's going to take you to see them for a little while." "Yes," Maya replied, but doubt flickered in her wide eyes. The memory of her grandmother yelling at her not long ago was still painfully clear. She nodded, then suddenly grabbed onto Huyen's clothes. "Mama, Grandma doesn't like me. She scares me." Huyen's heart clenched. Ye immediately crouched down to Maya's level. "It's okay," he said gently. "Uncle is here. No one will hurt your mom, and no one will hurt you. Maya looked at him, then back at her mother. Something about his presence eased her fear. She leaned into his arm naturally, like a child seeking safety from her own father. Huyen watched them for a moment and quietly exhaled. No matter how hard today became, she wouldn't be facing it alone. And Maya wouldn't either. Still, the door to her in-laws' house waited ahead, full of tension, danger, and words that could reopen old wounds. The road leading to Mr. Wan's house was strangely silent. Each step felt heavy. Maya clung tightly to her mother's hand, her fear obvious. Ye walked just behind them, alert, ready to step in at the slightest sign of trouble. As they entered the gate, Mrs. Joa's dry cough echoed from the porch, weak, yet sharp enough to chill the air. Huyen took a deep breath and leaned down to Maya. "Go on, sweetheart. Say hello to Grandpa and Grandma." "We heard you weren't feeling well," Huyen said carefully, "so I brought Maya to visit." Mrs. Joa lifted her head. Her sharp eyes scanned Huyen from head to toe, her annoyance completely undisguised. "If you're already here, sit down," she said flatly. Then, without warmth, "This is Maya." She turned and shouted toward the house, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Old man, Huyen brought Maya." Mr. Huyen emerged from the kitchen. His face softened when he saw his granddaughter. "My Maya," he exclaimed. "Grandpa missed you so much." But the warmth vanished almost instantly when he noticed Huyen standing behind Maya, and especially when he saw Ye. His expression darkened. "And you?" he said sharply. "What are you doing here?" Ye stepped forward and bowed politely. "Excuse me, I'm just here to keep Huyen and Maya company. I'll stay while they visit." Mrs. Joa jumped in immediately, her voice louder than necessary. "We're not going to hurt the child. There's no need to be so cautious." But the way she said it only made the atmosphere heavier, as if she were defending herself against an accusation no one had made. Maya shrank behind her mother, a chill running down her spine. This didn't feel like a family welcoming their granddaughter. Mr. Huyen looked at Maya, then at Ye, pain flickering across his face. "Why do you think we'd hurt her?" he asked quietly. "Why are you so afraid?" Huyen tried to speak, but Mrs. Joa cut in sharply. "The girl is staying here today. You can stand there and watch if you like." Yi immediately stepped forward, positioning himself protectively in front of Huyen and Maya. The tension in the courtyard thickened, like air before a storm. Maya tugged on Yi's sleeve and whispered, her voice shaking, "Uncle, I don't want to stay here." That single sentence was enough to push everyone to the edge. Huyen stroked Maya's hair gently. "That's enough," she said calmly. "Maya just came to say hello. She's scared, so we'll be leaving soon." Mr. Huyen frowned. "Leaving already? Let her stay and play a little." "It's fine." Mrs. Joa stormed out, her voice sharp. "If you keep shielding her like this, how will she ever get used to this house? Leave her here. She's this family's granddaughter." Her words made Maya burst into tears. She clung to her mother's neck, sobbing. "No, I don't want to stay. I'm scared." Mrs. Joa raised her voice even more, trying to overpower the crying. "Children cry all the time. Leave her here. Taking her away would be going against my wishes." That was the moment Ye could no longer stay silent. "You're scaring the child," he said coldly. "She just arrived, and you're already yelling at her. How do you expect her to stay?" His words hit hard, stripping away the fragile image of family harmony. Huyen gently pulled on his arm. "It's okay. Let me speak." She turned to her father-in-law, her eyes steady now, no longer trembling. "I brought Maya to see you, but she's scared. I'm taking her home." Mrs. Joa snapped again, her voice strange, forced. "I won't do anything to her. Just leave her here." The way she repeated that sentence made Ye's eyes narrow. The courtyard fell silent. Huyen felt a chill crawl up her spine. Why was Mrs. Joa so desperate to keep Maya? Before she could think further, Maya's sobs suddenly grew louder. She pointed straight at Mrs. Joa, her voice trembling with fear. "Grandpa, she's bad. She chased Mommy away." The words hung in the air like a blade. The courtyard went completely silent. Mrs. Joa froze. Mr. Huan's eyes widened, and in that moment, the truth that had been buried for 5 years finally began to crack open. Maya's words cut through the courtyard like a sudden clap of thunder. For a few heartbeats, no one moved. No one breathed. Mrs. Joa stood frozen, her face draining of color, then darkening as if a shadow had passed over it. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Mr. Huan stared at his granddaughter as though he had just been struck, his eyes wide with shock and something deeper, anger mixed with disbelief. Huyen instinctively pulled Maya into her arms, pressing the child's head against her chest. Her own voice trembled as she tried to calm her. "Maya, sweetheart, it's okay. You're just scared. Don't say that." But the more she tried to soften the moment, the heavier the silence became. Every adult in that yard knew. This wasn't a lie spoken in fear. This was something that had been sitting inside the child for a long time. Huyen lowered her head toward her father-in-law, forcing herself to stay composed. "If that's all, then please excuse us. Maya can't handle this anymore." She turned to leave. "Wait." Mr. Huan's voice rang out sharply, so loud that both Huyen and Maya flinched. He stepped forward, his face tight, his expression completely different from before. There was no anger in it now, only confusion and pain. "Sit down for a moment," he said, his tone heavy, impossible to ignore. "Maya, don't be afraid. Come here with Grandpa." Maya shook her head violently and buried her face deeper into Ye's shoulder. "No, I don't want to. I'm scared of her." Ye gently squeezed the girl's back, grounding her, then lifted his gaze to the grandparents. His eyes were steady, unwavering. Huyen spoke quietly, but firmly. "Yeah, it's best if Maya goes home today." But Mr. Huan wasn't looking at Ye. His eyes stayed locked on his granddaughter, slowly filling with moisture, as if something long buried had begun to stir. "Maya," he asked softly, "why did you say that? Who told you? Did you see something Grandma did to your mom?" The question fell like ice water over everyone. Mrs. Joa finally reacted. "Don't listen to a child," she snapped. "What could she possibly know?" But her voice lacked its usual sharpness. It shook, thin and forced, as though Maya's words had struck exactly where she didn't want them to. Ye frowned. When he spoke, each word landed carefully, deliberately. "Children may be small, but they don't invent things that scare them enough to cry like this." His gaze stayed fixed on Mrs. Joa. She must have seen something, or heard something. Mrs. Joa took an unconscious step back, her fingers trembling at her sides. Panic flickered across her eyes before she quickly masked it. "I didn't do anything to that child." Mr. Huan turned to his wife slowly. His voice dropped, low, but weighted with suspicion. "Is there something you haven't told me?" That single question made the air feel unbearably tight. Huyen held Maya closer, her heart pounding violently. She didn't know exactly what her daughter had seen or heard, but she knew one thing for certain. The door Mrs. Joa had kept locked for years had just been pushed open. And then Maya whispered again, her small voice carrying clearly through the silence. I heard Grandma say Mommy brings bad luck to this house, that she didn't want her here. The words hit like gasoline thrown onto an open flame. Mrs. Joa's face turned livid. Mr. Huyen went completely still, his fists slowly clenching at his sides. The courtyard fell into a suffocating silence. Mr. Huyen looked at Maya, then slowly turned to his wife. His gaze was sharp now, stripping away layer after layer of the false peace he had believed in for years. His voice came out rough, trembling with restrained fury. What did you say to my granddaughter? Did you really throw her mother out of this house? Mrs. Joa staggered back as if slapped. Her hands clutched the hem of her clothes. I only said a few things. Children remember things wrong. But Mr. Huyen didn't let her escape. He stepped closer, his eyes burning. Don't twist this. I'm asking you directly. Did you throw Huyen out or not? She glanced at Huyen, then at Maya, shaking in Ye's arms. Huyen said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence, her wounds, were answer enough. Mr. Huyen's face hardened. If you won't answer, it's because you're guilty. Mrs. Joa's breathing quickened. I did it because of Tuc, she blurted out. Because of him. Mr. Huyen frowned deeply. What does Tuc have to do with this? He's in prison. Why did you treat Huyen and Maya like that? The pressure finally broke her. I was afraid, Mrs. Joa shouted, her voice cracking. Afraid she'd abandon my son. Afraid she'd take my granddaughter away. And I didn't want her bad luck in this house. The courtyard went dead silent. Huyen froze. Ye's fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. Maya whimpered softly, clinging to his neck. Mr. Huyen stared at his wife as if he were seeing her for the first time. Bad luck? His voice shook. Do you know what Huyen has endured? Do you know that Maya is all that's left of Tuc? His voice broke. When you threw her out, you threw out your own granddaughter too. Mrs. Joa's knees buckled. She collapsed onto the ground, sobbing, her shoulders shaking. I just wanted her to stay here, she cried. I wanted to keep Maya until Tuc got out of prison. Those words landed heavily. Yi stepped forward instantly, his voice sharp with disbelief. So you wanted to keep Maya? To take her to see Tuc? Mrs. Joa said nothing. Her silence was the answer. Mr. Huyen slammed his fist onto the wooden table nearby, the sound echoing through the yard. You've destroyed everything, he said, tears streaming down his face. Because of you, Huyen and Maya suffered for years. I lost my daughter-in-law. I lost my granddaughter. Mrs. Joa sobbed uncontrollably, but the damage was done. Huyen stood there, holding Maya, her heart aching in a way that no revelation could heal. The truth didn't bring relief. It only reopened wounds she had tried so hard to bury. She lifted her head, her voice low but unwavering. Everything Maya said today wasn't a coincidence. Children don't lie about things that terrify them. Mr. Huyen pressed his palm to his forehead, looking suddenly older, exhausted. Don't go, he murmured. There's more. Another secret you need to know. But Huyen shook her head. She looked down at Maya's tear-streaked face, then back at the house that had once held her hopes, and had later cast her out without mercy. She wiped Maya's tears and turned to Ye. Her voice was soft, but resolute. Let's go. Maya is afraid, and I have nothing left to do with this family. Ye met her gaze, his expression filled not with anger, but understanding. He nodded. Yes, let's go. He placed a protective hand on her shoulder and stepped slightly in front of them, shielding them from the heavy stairs behind. Mrs. Joa reached out weakly, as if to say something, but no words came. Mr. Huyen remained standing, trembling, unable to move. Huyen didn't look back. She squeezed Maya's hand gently. I want to go home, Maya whispered. Yes, sweetheart, Huyen replied. Mommy's taking you home. Ye adjusted Maya in his arms and guided Huyen toward the gate. The wind blew softly, carrying a chill, but beside them was warmth, steady and reassuring. As they passed through the gate, Huyen paused for just a second, not to look back, but to let go. The gate closed with a sharp click, a full stop to years of pain. You're not alone anymore, Ye murmured. You have me, and you have a new home. Huyen looked at him, tears still in her eyes, but something inside her finally felt calm. Thank you, she whispered. The three of them walked down the small path together. Behind them lay the chaos of the past. Ahead was the quiet peace they were building, side by side. And for the first time in many years, Huyen felt it clearly. Her family was no longer behind her. They were right beside her. In today's story, we follow Huyen, a mother scarred by the past, as she takes her daughter Maya to visit her paternal grandparents. What begins as a simple visit quickly unravels into a tense confrontation that exposes long-buried family secrets. Maya's innocent words reveal that her mother was once driven out of the house, and suddenly, the truth about past betrayals, hidden fears, and plans involving her father in prison comes to light. Emotions clash, accusations fly, and the seemingly peaceful family shows its true fractures. Through tears, fear, and courage, Huyen and Maya face the painful reality of a home that was never truly safe. But as they walk away, shielded by those who truly care for them, one question lingers. What other secrets are still hidden behind the walls of that family? Stay tuned to uncover the next shocking revelations.